Hello class, I am Paul DiStefano, your instructor for Adaptive Project Management, and in this video I would like to go over some of the characteristic differences between adaptive project management and traditional project management. It can be a little confusing because in your experience in any projects you've managed or been involved in or will be involved in, you're going to find there is a hybrid situation that is most likely, since traditional program management was the most accepted over many years through PMI and PMBOK, and adaptive program management, primarily using Agile, is relatively new for the last 10 years and becoming more widely used in the last couple years. Now, in my work at Lockheed Martin for the last 37 years, we had always used a hybrid approach to traditional program management and not the strict PMBOK definitions, and Agile management or project management has just become more popular really in the last 3 years. So let's talk about what I posted on Wednesday. You probably already noticed that the assignment for Module 1 is very similar to the assignment for Module 2. Module 1 discussed more of a comparison between the two project management styles, and Module 2 is headed towards a strict description of Agile project management as a form of APM. So even though the assignment language seems to be a very subtle difference, you're headed more towards the adaptive, and the traditional project management was just really introductory in order for you to understand where the methodologies came from. So with that being said, the first characteristic approach where APM is more iterative and incremental plan, meaning there are very short sprints that are about 2 weeks long generally. Iterative meaning if the scope changes, you may have to go back and redo a sprint in order to account for the change in scope that just occurred. Whereas TPM is more linear waterfall plan, where the intent was to develop a start to finish project plan up front and not deviate. Of course, one step usually still does have to be done before the next step is started in APM if there's an interdependency. If everything can be divided up into very isolated individual plans, that's not usually the case though, so you may have to evolve Agile as you go based on how the previous sprint finished, what needs to be done in the next sprint, whereas TPM always try to anticipate that right up front and develop a start to finish plan. So there's one big difference. Flexibility embraces changes and adapts to evolving requirements in Agile. Now, to me, as an operations director, that sounds good on paper, but if you get into a mode where you're making constant scope changes, the program will be completely out of control. You will overrun your budget. You will overrun your schedule. So although it says embraces change, I wouldn't be too keen on getting too excited if changes are occurring constantly and you're not making a lot of progress because you're doing too many iterations. Whereas TPM is the opposite end of the spectrum, where it thinks that the requirements can be defined up front and follow a rigid plan and never deviate. That also is unrealistic, and if everybody panics when there's a change and falls off course and is not able to recover and mitigate that change, that's even a worse problem than making too many changes that you're expecting to have. So again, a hybrid plan. I'm used to working kind of in the middle between these, where yes, you try to define the requirements, because after all, you did bid the program, you wrote a proposal, you gave it to the customer, they accepted the statement of work. Now you're off and running, and changes can be detrimental to that. So the hybrid of that, somewhere in the middle, right about here, would be you define the requirements, but you don't panic when there are changes, and you're able to adapt to those changes quickly. Collaboration, again, A hybrid encourages frequent comms among team members, stakeholders, and customers. This is 100% true and will always lead to a better finished product and a better experience during the project, where everybody feels they have input and everybody understands what's going on before it gets delivered, and suddenly it's no, that's not what I wanted. So this collaboration is important. Communications, of course, is important between the team members and the customer, and no one would ever try to tell you otherwise. Messaging is important, so you need to make sure it's accurate and thorough. So sometimes jumping to conclusions too soon is a bad form of communications. The best scenario would be to let the customer, the stakeholders know, yes, we have a problem, we've discovered an issue, we are working on it to correct it. We will give you many more details when we have more accurate information to present. That is usually the way to handle that. The hierarchical chain of command comm structures you'll see in a lot of companies, including defense contractors, where I would tell my boss, he tells his boss, he tells his boss, and everybody finds out kind of in a pyramid type methodology. It loses information in translation as it goes up the chain, and it would be interesting to hear what the president of the company hears versus what the engineer that discovered the problem says. Be interesting to compare notes on that. The deliverables, incremental value to the customer for each iteration versus final project when completed. Again, most companies you'll find are more of a hybrid approach, because no one wants to wait for the end project before they see what they're getting and what they paid for. So the incremental value, there are usually milestones, there are usually what we call knowledge points, where incremental value has to be delivered. A customer has to agree that you can continue to the next knowledge point to make sure they're completely on board with what you are doing. So again, these are kind of opposite extremes, as everything above was kind of opposite extremes also. Documentation prioritizes work over docs, but still requires docs, because there's no world in which you're not going to have to document what you're doing and submit that to the customer for their approval, so they know that what you're doing meets the requirements. Of course, on a defense contract, overly detailed docs throughout the project is very prevalent with procedurals that have to be submitted constantly to the customer. A procedure stands for Contract Data Requirements List, and it is usually extremely lengthy for what you are submitting to the customer. So I think I posted earlier, my recommendation in that case is that you have a group that just works on documentation and procedurals, so that the engineers who are trying to write software, design hardware, perform integration, get prototypes built, that they aren't constantly distracted by the multitude of documents that would have to be submitted to the customer. Risk management is another interesting hybrid where Agile manages continuously and mitigates incrementally, and TPM addresses upfront and may not actively manage. Well, in my world, risk management, risks and opportunities were managed constantly with weekly risk management meetings, where you had to status your 4 blockers, you had to show what your mitigation plan was with the schedule of when it's going to get done. And of course, the question of opportunities was always asked, because as much as you take chances and risks and may incur cost impacts, you also want to address opportunities for reducing cost and coming up with better ways to do things. Very important that you always think of risks as risks and opportunities. Customer involvement, of course, involving the customer throughout is important, and limiting it to initial requirements development would not be a good idea. Although you're going to be extensively involved in initial requirements development, you still want to follow that on with constant customer involvement throughout. Team dynamics, okay, Agile, self-organizing, cross-functional, close collaboration. Common sense would tell you that's always going to be the best approach. Cross-functional meaning engineering, manufacturing, procurement, quality, all working together at the same time to develop the best solutions for the customers and collaborating together so that when issues are found in any area, it could be iteratively implemented into the plan, and that would be kind of the embracing change portion of it. The TPM, hierarchical chain of command with strict roles and responsibilities, to some extent that's still going to be true, where engineering is going to do engineering work, manufacturer will do manufacturing work, and managers and directors and supervisors have their defined roles and responsibilities. That probably isn't going to change and probably shouldn't, but the intent would be for those groups to all collaborate with each other, stay in their swim lane for the most part, but also collaborate with their expertise to the other swim lanes in order to help the project make progress. Okay, lastly, we have utilization, and for Agile, it's based on complexity, customer preference, and organizational culture. And for traditional program management, project management, it's based on complexity, customer preferences, and organizational culture. It's the same. So deciding on which method you're going to use or using a hybrid method many times will involve what the customer somewhat demands that you do, especially on defense contracts. They're going to want certain documentation. They're going to want certain knowledge points to be met to prove that you're accomplishing what needs to be done for the end goal to be met. Organizational culture, that's simply saying that companies are used to doing it a certain way, and sometimes it's hard to get them to deviate. So what's good about this course is you're creating presentations that help your management switch over from traditional to adaptive, which is good, but you have to be very convincing of why it's good. They're used to doing things a certain way for many years, and you're going to have to present a compelling case if you're going to implement Agile into the management structure. It might have to be incrementally implemented rather than a complete switchover. And I think a lot of companies are in that incremental installation of these processes, and that's why you see a lot of hybrid approaches wherever you go. So class, that's all I wanted to cover in this tutorial, and just give you an overview of what I think the differences are and what my experience has shown, where the real world lies, somewhere on either the left or right or the middle. In this case, mostly more towards the middle. So you, as a project manager, you're going to have to make a decision as to how much or how little you want to implement based on the environment you're working in, the customer you have, the organizational management and what they expect, and also how complex the project is. So if you have any questions, please give me a call, and I would be glad to go over any of this information if you send me email, text message, or post a discussion question. I appreciate your time, and good luck in the course and this week's assignment submittals. Thank you. Bye.